Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to our session on connecting with students to support well-being. We're so excited to have our speakers today, Julie Langholt and Nate Bach. And a reminder to everyone that this session will be recorded and questions will be answered at the end of the session. We also have live transcript at the bottom as well. If you can't see that, you can click on the CC, I believe. A little bit about our speakers today. Julie Langholt is the Dean of Student Advocacy and Accountability at Metropolitan Community College here in Omaha. Julie received her master's in educational psychology with an emphasis in counseling from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Over her 24-year career in student affairs at MCC, Julie has worked in academic advising, career services, disability support services, counseling, as well as being an adjunct social sciences instructor. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you.
And Nate Bach is the current Associate Director of Counseling and Psychological Services at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. He has been in this role for under a year. Over his 22-year career, Nate has provided academic advising, mental health counseling, drug and alcohol counseling and evaluations, alcohol and drug prevention, and career counseling. Nate also has a special interest in motivational interviewing. He is a licensed independent mental health practitioner and a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. And welcome you too. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Well, welcome to everyone. I am glad to see so many of you have joined us. Just a little bit about why Nate and I are presenting. I think it's important to give you some context. Metro Community College and the University of Nebraska and Omaha are working very closely on some projects related to helping the metropolitan area students, and one of those projects is to provide mental health services to our students to improve our reach out to students. And so our partnership involves that we can refer students to the counseling and psychological services counselors at the University of Nebraska at Omaha to provide brief therapy to help them with issues that are coming up. One of the reasons we do that is because the community college does not offer mental health services. We have advocacy counselors that provide case management and support, but we do not provide clinical services. So Nate's team is able to provide that clinical level of care for the community college's students. Did I accurately get that put together?
I think you did it beautifully. Thanks, Julie.
Wonderful. So we are going to present a little bit about students, because I know that this is an area that many of our staff and ourselves struggle with, is those students that are really in distress and need some help. What I'm going to ask is that if you would put things in the chat, if you have questions or comments, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then Nicole, I'll give you an opportunity to maybe share some of those things as we go along. And as Nicole said, we'll have an opportunity at the end for questions. So if there's questions that you think of as we're going through, feel free to put those in so Nicole can start gathering that information as well. This session really is about learning and not judging our students. It's about how can we best support our students. Okay, there. So the objectives are to understand what mental health is and how it may affect our students, whether they're at the community college or your university. And I know we have a number of different locations represented in this. We also want to help you to identify or recognize that signs that a student needs support, help describe ways of responding to students that will help them feel encouraged. I was listened in earlier in the presentation on basic needs and really helping students be okay with asking for help, because I think students sometimes are afraid to ask. They are afraid of how other people will respond. So we want to help you with learning some skills on responding, help you understand when to refer and connect students to support on campus, and then really reflect on your response after you support a student, because how we handle that situation will inform how we respond in the future to other situations that we may come across. So the first question I have is, can you put some things in the chat about what are some of the indicators of distress that you've seen working with the students that you've worked with? And then related to that is, how do you think mental health issues are impacting our students' academic work? So I'll give you a few minutes and Nicole, do you want to start reading some of those for us?
Sure, we've got grade slipping, missing classes repeatedly, no showing to appointments. Mental health issues can impact a student's work by not showing up to class or appointments. Wanting to end the phone call as soon as parent walks in the room. I've seen that. Student states that they are not eating or sleeping, missing classes, frequent absence, failing grades, withdrawal, missing assignments, missing school, getting a little bit emotional naturally. Low energy in advising meetings, mental health affecting purpose and their why they're at college, missing and canceling appointments depending on how they feel.
Okay, so a lot of ways that mental health distress can impact a student. What we know is that mental health has an impact on college completion, and we know that it's one of the primary barriers to college completion. The study that I have here is a 2005 Healthy Mind study that indicated depression was associated with a twofold increase. I will tell you that there are more recent studies out there. We are continually seeing research that, especially over the last 18 months, that just shows our students are struggling with depression, anxiety, basic living situations, food, housing insecurity, etc. And they're likely to depart for those reasons. And then mental health symptoms and trauma can impact a student's ability to focus and attend to information. That was in many of the responses. They don't show up for class. They aren't focusing. They're not turning in assignments. They miss appointments. It can impact their ability to retain and recall information. How many of you have had students that have said to you, I can't think when I get into a testing situation. My brain just freezes. I know it, but I can't do on that anxiety. And just staying curious and motivated can be impacted. So we know that this all has an impact, and it's really important. And as advisors or as faculty, you are in a prime position to connect with those students and help them address those concerns. Nate, I think this is your slide.
This one is my slide. So I love the idea of this slide creating a scale of mental health. I think with the pandemic the last year, mental health has become a concern. It's been talked about a lot. I also think we don't know a lot of what has happened and what is going to happen. I know on our campus, we're preparing for a third wave of the pandemic, which would be mental health. On that same, I've had a lot of conversations with people about this. That very well may happen. We also don't know, as we return to having interactions with others and that type of thing, how quickly are we going to respond and get back into feeling better? What will that look like? In all of this, it's all on a scale. We've talked about, we've seen an uptick in mental health. What does that mean? Does that mean we see an uptick in diagnosable mental health disorders? Do we see an uptick in symptoms of mental health disorders, but we wouldn't necessarily diagnose it? So there's a lot of different measures going on and a lot of different ways that we've been looking at this, but I love that this is a continuum, because I think we have to think about mental health in that way. I heard the term languishing the other day, and if you run a search for it, there's different articles out there about it. And really what that's getting to is that we might just not be feeling our best, that our mental health might be lagging. And it might not be that we have a diagnosis at that point, but we definitely are feeling something, that we're not at our 100%. And a lot of these articles talk about having grace, and grace with others and grace with ourselves, as we went through something that hasn't happened, since what is it, 1918, 1919, since the last pandemic like this, and the world looks so much different. So, we could pour through, this scale, but it's important to realize that as we have somebody in front of us, I think sometimes in working with advisors, sometimes somebody will start what we call emoting, and it leads to an automatic, oh, I need to call counseling right away. And it might be good to think about asking some questions. And hey, it seems like you really, your energy's down from the last time I saw you. How's the pandemic been with your energy? Have them talk towards some of this a little bit, because you might get a sense that they aren't balancing life the way they were before. And, just getting back in balance for some may help a lot with their mental health. They might also say, you know what, I've struggled with depression, and just during this pandemic, it really made it worse, a lot worse. Then it's kind of like, well, have you been talking to anybody? No, I really haven't had the energy to reach out. That's a really good one, depending on what services you have available to you. That's a great referral to counseling services. So, I think inquiring about where people are on the continuum, it's not an assessment. It's just maybe asking a few more questions. If somebody in front of you is having some of these symptoms, is it that they're kind of out of what I would call mental health shape, or do they have mental health diagnosis? Back to you, Julie.
Okay. And I just want to add here that oftentimes just because someone has a mental illness diagnosis does not mean that they're an automatic referral into counseling, because they may be doing just fine. But again, as Nate said, asking questions. I'm not going to talk a lot about this slide, but it talks about different zones of arousal. And I see this a lot when I work with students. And we get referrals from students that are in this hyperarousal, they're overstimulated, they're in this fight or flight response. They're shaking, or they're very emotionally reactive. They are defensive. I'm not going to talk about that. Or they can't slow their thoughts down enough to stay focused on what you're talking about. They are emotionally overwhelmed. So there's the hyperarousal we'll see in sessions. Signs that students are doing okay is that they are able to think and feel simultaneously. They seem to be fairly stable in how they're responding. They're aware of boundaries. Their reactions adapt or fit to the situation. And then you've got this hypoarousal, an immobilization, too little arousal. And I think Nate alluded to this before, the student that just doesn't have the energy that they've had before. I think about a student that came into our offices and saw one of our advocacy counselors that flat affect, wasn't emotional, wasn't vocalizing, just appeared disconnected, just that really dead response, raised some flags for us that we were concerned enough to reach out to connect them to other resources, because it was so extreme.
I think when we're thinking about these different states, it's important to kind of remember that it could be the same stimulus that takes somebody to this hyperarousal or hypoarousal. As a social worker told me and made this comment years ago, which I thought was super enlightening, that given the same stimulus, some of us tend towards anxiety and some of us tend towards depression. And so if you think, just how, and we all do this, and if you think when something happens in your own life, when, a big life change comes, or a disappointing news, or something that's very difficult, are you someone that gets a bunch of energy, wants to find answers, and kind of runs around trying to, get a bunch of stuff done and take care of things when maybe there isn't even, a solution at that point? Or are you someone that slows down to the point where, it's hard to even get the energy to address the situation that's going on? So in some ways, it tells us that something's going on. And because they're in a hyperarousal zone or a hypoarousal zone, doesn't necessarily tell us why, But it tells us that this is a reaction to something that's been going on in their life. And, for many of us, when we do advising, we're there to recognize and then to help, talk to them about getting maybe the help they need, or to talk to them about what they're open to do. And so these are, just really interesting arousal states to think about when somebody's sitting in front of you and they're acting this way. I like to call the hyper arousal as over functioning. They're just, it's like they're running in circles and maybe not getting anything done sometimes. And so you'll hear this with people who are studying. It's like, well, I read this, I did this, but nothing's sticking. Or on the other side, it's they had trouble opening up the book or getting to class or that type of thing. So I think these are a great way to think about just what do we have in front of us and what are they, what tells us that there's a struggle going on.
It's really important, and when you look at the different states of arousal, but just things to recognize when you're seeing students that may suggest that the student's experiencing difficulty. We hit some of those in the states of arousal, but it's maybe physical indicators or academic indicators. And I'm going to run through a list of some of these that you probably have seen before, but it's just a good reminder that when there are changes in a student's behavior or functioning, it's a good time to say, what's going on? What are you struggling with? Is there anything we can talk about, so that you can kind of get an idea of what's causing those changes? I always talk to faculty about looking for a change from baseline. If you have a student that's always coming into your class and just is kind of in this chronic sad state, that's kind of their baseline. When they deviate from that is when I would be more concerned in wanting to reach out for some help. Not that we don't want to help those students that are kind of sad all the time, but it's the changes that cause us the most concern frequently. So if we look at recognizing physical indicators, if you ever had that student that just suddenly their hygiene has just gone to pieces, or they seem excessively tired all the time, for faculty falling asleep in class, students that lose weight or gain weight, any change in appetite or sleep are physical indicators that there may be something going on that we want to explore further and see if there's some way that we can provide some support. The academic indicators: missed assignments, missing appointments, repeated absences, a deterioration in the quality or quantity of their work. We see that frequently with students that are struggling with depression. I serve on our financial aid standards of academic progress, and we look at a lot of students' progress reports, and they start out and they have great grades, and then all of a sudden there's just this 2 or 3 quarters where their grades just plummet. And frequently it's because there's something else going on that is causing concern. And if we'd recognized it earlier, perhaps we could have helped salvage some of those quarters. Behavioral indicators: students that say direct statements that they're really struggling with a family problem, or they have difficulty in controlling their emotions. A student that is tearful with what is very little stimulus input, but they just have a hard time controlling or a hard time talking because they're so emotional about things. Or even our angry or hostile students that are just yelling or aggressive comments. It may be an indicator that there's something else going on that we want to ask. Hey, you seem really upset or struggling with something. Can we talk about what's going on?
Along with that one, I see this sometimes too, is kind of in that hyper arousal state is, they send you, 6 or 7 emails in like 40 minutes. They're wanting answers. They haven't heard back from me in 5 minutes, and they're like, and that's also something that, can be indicative of certain mental health disorders that are going on. And so sometimes we, you might look at those emails and say, gosh, this student is just being really aggressive in how they're, reaching out to me. There might be something going on there, something else going on, and that they have no sense of normal sense of time, that, they're sending these emails and they want answers very quickly. Well, that goes along with a hyperarousal state.
And then safety indicators, that statements of despair, suicide, you're not going to see me around, or suddenly, especially if, giving things away. I don't need this anymore. They are isolating, they're withdrawing from folks. I've had students come in and say, I'm really concerned about my friend because of what they're posting on their social media accounts, because it's like they're saying goodbye to everybody. They're withdrawing from any interactions. They don't want to do anything. We oftentimes will see writing where they are writing about death and dying and not wanting to be here. Those are all safety indicators that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to and checking out with the student. What's going on? How can we help you? Making that referral, which we'll talk about how to do that in just a little bit.
Now, I would say on our campus, we do, REACH training, we used to do gatekeeper training, Campus Connect. When we're in this kind of situation, we don't want to just give a referral. If they're making direct comments, we really want to ask, wow, it really seems like you have a lot going on, and then go back to the comments they made. You made some comments about not being around. I'm really, really worried about you, and this might seem awkward asking, but you've been having thoughts of killing yourself. We really need to ask that, and then we can get help to them immediately. The other piece to that I've seen over my career is that we used to see those comments verbally, and that was the majority of where we saw it. Now, the mass majority of it is in writing in some way, on social media or in assignments, that type of thing.
And when they move beyond just those statements, those emergency indicators, behaving in physical or verbally aggressive manner towards themselves or others, that self-harm, that injury behavior, cutting on themselves, students that are doing self-injury, unresponsive. And I tell people, trust your instincts. If it feels threatening or dangerous to you, that is the time to really reach out. Nate, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of how UNO responds to those?
Sure. So we do have every campus is different. We have a behavioral review team where, if any of these type of things are being seen by anybody on campus, whether it's staff or residents, assistants, anybody that works directly with students, we try to do a lot of training. And there's a form that can be filled out. Hey, there's this concerning thing that happened, and it can be reported, and that gets addressed very quickly. And some of these situations we get pulled together within 10 minutes, depending on the level. So I think in these last two slides, it's super important to, and I'm sure most of you are, but to find yourself aware of what's available for these emergency kind of situations. Who would you call? Is there training? I think the suicide intervention training, if you haven't gone through it and your campus has it, it's very important to do. It's one of those things where it's, we avoid pain as human beings and uncomfortable things. And, it's an uncomfortable topic, but it's even more uncomfortable when we find ourselves sitting with a student where we're thinking, boy, I really wish I knew more what to do right now. I've been in the situation where I've gone home and maybe needed to assess more of what was going on with the student in that situation. And that is a very sleepless night, thinking, boy, I really should have been more direct about asking where they were at with all this. I should have been more direct about asking about their suicidal thoughts, because I'm wondering now if they're safe. So put yourself in contact with whatever resources you have. Sometimes, even if your campus doesn't have those resources, sometimes there's resources in the community that can do like a QPR training. Any of those type of things can be very helpful in these situations.
We're very fortunate at Metropolitan Community College that all of our police officers, because we have law enforcement officers on our campus, are all crisis response trained, crisis intervention trained. So when we have students that we're very concerned about, we're able to call on our police officers to help with connecting to a crisis response team from our community for those immediate needs, or even to do an emergency hold on that individual if they deem that's necessary. And oftentimes it's important to know is that can that be done on your campus, or it may be that you need to call your local law enforcement to connect with those resources. But we want, when students are in immediate danger, we want to get immediate assistance. And being familiar with those, how to report that on your campus to get quick support is really important. The next step, so you recognize these indicators. Nicole, did we have any comments or statements about things to recognize before I move on?
It looks like we just have a lot of staff relating to the material, and so that kind of the point being that might help us relate more to the students as well. So
Okay.
fantastic, just saying thank you for the opportunity you provide to our students.
So the next step, once you've recognized this, how do you respond? And I think Nate and I both talked about this. If you're comfortable, it's important to say to the student, I've noticed this, I've seen, how can we help you? Let's start that conversation. If you don't know the student, you may prefer to make a referral and reach out to have someone else reach out to the student. Although my experience is that oftentimes if they're in your office, if you can have a conversation, it makes it much easier for the student to feel better about getting help. We've talked about this in our joint sessions with UNO about students that know that the referral is being made, or that you've talked to, or they make their own self-referral, are probably more likely to fall through on getting counseling or other resource help.
What we run into a lot of times on our campus is that if you don't do the work to find out if the student is motivated to go in to talk to someone, sometimes it's our own value that we're thinking, oh, they really need to go to counseling. And as that conversation develops with the student, they're really feeling like that you're wanting that of them. And they're, whether we want to admit to it or not, them being in your office, you being in the position you are in, there is a hierarchical relationship going on there. They may not feel comfortable saying no. They might say, no, yeah, okay, I'll go to counseling, because they feel like there's some authority there. And so when we find that, like, advisors, may call or make the appointment for a student, there's a much higher no-show rate. Whereas if they say, hey, is this something, you might be up to doing? Have you thought about this before? I'm happy to find the number for you, and I can have you talk to them to make the appointment, and I'd be happy to even leave the room while you do that. In those cases, they become more invested in making that appointment, and they're more likely to show up for the appointment.
So as you're making that decision about how to respond, think about your level of experience and your comfort. The nature and severity of the problem. More serious problems, you may want to get somebody involved much more quickly. Your ability to give time to the situation. I think we oftentimes are under a lot of pressure to see students and keep things moving. And if you've got a student that's in crisis or needs to talk, sometimes you've got to be able to give time to that situation and allow that student time to process, because they are going to maybe be hesitant to talk to you. They may need time to formulate their thoughts. They just may need some time to feel safe to talk further with you. But it does take some time to have those conversations. Some people are just more comfortable responding to other people's distress and crisis. So steps for responding. You think about setting the stage. You want to ask permission. You want to start the conversation, maintain professional boundaries. So setting the stage is making sure that you're talking to the student privately. If they not having that conversation where they feel like everybody's hearing their business. I don't want everybody to know what's going on. I will have this conversation with faculty. If you're concerned about a student, don't call them out in class, because that just makes it more difficult for them to trust that you were going to be able to help them. I think you also set the stage by your body language and your own stress level. Remember, you have to keep breathing so that you can stay calm. Make sure that you're open to having that conversation. not overly positive, but have a welcoming, I'm here to listen, I'm here to help. And just making sure that you have time. And that, I think that for oftentimes in an office situation is you start feeling pressured because you've got this student and you've got all these other students that are waiting to see you. And it's like, how do I balance that? But just taking that time and not rushing that conversation.
There's a comment in the chat that's really great about non-traditional students, and sometimes they want more of a transactional relationship with the academic advisor, and sometimes that limits the relationship to be able to go into some of these conversations. And I think that's a great point. I think there's some ways to go about that. I used to say things like, we have this phrase at UNO that whenever we get in that situation where it's like, gosh, I really want to ask this, but it's kind of awkward, or I maybe don't know the student well enough to say, hey, at UNO, we really have this value, and it's posted all over campus, which is this culture of care. So one of my roles as an advisor is not just to help you with, choosing classes and looking at your career plan, but also to kind of just check on your well-being right now. And we've just been through this pandemic, and one of the things that I've kind of taken as a personal goal of mine is all the students that I've been meeting with, I just want to check in with them, how they're doing emotionally, how they're doing behaviorally, how has this all been for you? So that we can kind of, see how they respond to that. Now, we've all had students that don't, they might give us a one-word response, I'm fine, it's fine. And, we kind of have to take them where they're at, and we want to respect that boundary. Sometimes that opens it up to help open up the relationship to say, it doesn't just have to be about that. And I would love to hear more about that. So thanks, David, for writing that comment in there.
So it's asking our permission, trying to open it up and being respectful, as Nate said, those boundaries, because I think when you push students too hard, I think that can be more dangerous. But if you say, okay, but if you change your mind, I'm here, let me know. Express your concern. I think it's important to say, I've observed that you're missing a lot of classes, or you've told me you are struggling with this. So be specific about what you're seeing or hearing. Asking open-ended questions. Help me understand what's going on. How are things going for you? Listen attentively to what they say. Tell me more about that. Allow them to talk. They should be the ones talking. It's not about you doing more talking than they are. I always remind myself that it's important when I'm working with a student to let them talk and not jump in with my own information or suggestions for help. Give them a chance to talk. We've mentioned this before, maintaining professional boundaries. The purpose of this is not to teach you all how to be counselors and provide clinical services. The intent is to help you recognize and at least be able to begin that process of, there's something going on. How can I help you connect to folks that have the skills and the resources to help you address those? I always want to make sure that students also understand that I can't promise you absolute confidentiality. Sometimes there are going to be things that I do need. If you are talking about hurting yourself or hurting someone else, that I have to involve other people. And don't expect students to disclose their diagnosis. They can talk about their things. Now, what I'm finding is that frequently students are will share much more information than I probably would have, and they may share their diagnosis. But your response to them shouldn't be driven by their diagnosis. It should be what's occurring in the moment and what you're seeing and hearing them say. And again, students who are suicidal need swift professional intervention. Know the resources on how to get that help quickly on your campuses. And I'm going to put a plug in here. I think Nate has talked about this, is having QPR training on your campuses or gatekeeper training for suicide prevention. Mental health first aid is a good training program, but having those types of programs on your campus and encouraging folks to participate is very helpful. I think we're going to skip this practice. I think it's important though to at least talk a little bit about listening exercises, taking time to be able to listen. Find a partner when you're done here. One of the things you can take away is find somebody and practice just listening to that person, giving them 2 minutes and listen, and then being able to respond to them what you heard them say is a really good skill to practice in a low intensity situation, so that when you've got more intense situations, you're better prepared to listen to what other people are saying. We don't have to have answers. We just need to listen. Okay, Nate, I'm gonna let you talk about making referrals and kind of that whole process.
A lot of this has been alluded to already. I think that paying attention to behaviors and paying attention to what people say is the first start of the referral, because that's what you start with. And the listening skills that go along with that is the paraphrasing. So, it starts with, I hear you say that, you've been struggling getting to class, and you've been, having a hard time getting out of bed, sleeping, through half the days. Concerns me to hear that, and, might say like, what are your concerns about that? Has there ever been another time that you kind of experienced that too? I love to scale things. So I might say, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, I'm not worried about that at all, and 10 being, I'm pretty concerned about that. I'd like to take care of it. Where are you at on that scale? And they come back. Let's say that they don't even give you much. Let's say, that you see it as kind of a concern, and they say, I'm at a 4. So here's where that motivational interviewing comes in that I love so much. 4 is not very high on the scale. Typically, what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, how do we get you to a 6 or a 7? And that's the wrong direction to go. Instead, ask them, you said a 4. I'm interested. Why didn't you say like a 2? And what you're going to hear there is all of a sudden you're going to hear change talk. They're going to say things like, well, sleeping most of the morning, I've been skipping, not making it to my class, and I've been falling behind in my class, and that's not good. And so all of a sudden they're seeing the things that it can be impacting that, if they fixed it, it would be positive. So I love using the scale that way, and I love backing it up and saying, like, why not a 2 if they answered a 4? Then you can say, well, I have some resources, if you'd be interested. And I think having a multitude of them, right now we're planning on our campus that, where are we going to refer people who are languishing versus, would be better off going to counseling? Is the referral to, it's like, well, I haven't been very active at all. And, maybe they're like, I don't want to go do counseling. Okay. Well, you mentioned that you're not being real active, and we have some drop-in classes over at our rec center. What about something like that? Would you be willing to do that? So being very, first of all, flexible of not just a canned referral, like, oh, I hear mental health, that's a counseling referral. I had mentioned before about, like, if it is counseling referral, but letting them know, like, is that something you like to do? You'll hear a lot of times from students, I've been meaning to do that, I just haven't. So the motivation is there to do it, and say, yeah, it can be really hard to do that. Would it be helpful if I called them for you and just handed the phone, and I'll even leave the room while you set up the appointment? That's a good way to do the referral if they're willing to do it. If not, like the slide says, going to the website where they have the information so they can see the website, also writing it down. Here's the information that you need. Here's when they're open. You might even have a connection with somebody that is part of that resource. So you can say, hey, we have a lot of contact with, with Mary Kate over there, and she's great. You could even, request them, or, and then also the normalizing, I think it's important to say too, like, part of my role as an advisor is to take an interest in students and see what is going on for them. So I make these referrals a lot. You'd be surprised how many times a day I check in with people about mental health and make this referral. It helps them feel like they're not on an island, and to normalize it. And I do think the pandemic is bringing mental health out into the forefront, where it's hopefully it's going to be a little easier to talk about with people. So I think those are the biggest parts of the referral. And the other piece to it that I know from a behavioral or from a motivational interviewing standpoint is if they make the referral, whether they call or whether you give them the physical piece of paper, at the end of the appointment, you might say like, okay, so we're going to be meeting next semester or next quarter, and that's going to be about this many weeks away. Is it okay if I just ask how the follow-up was on the referral that we just talked about? That helps them know that there's some, that they're going to be having that conversation. It helps them actually make the appointment and do follow through. And if they say, no, I didn't do it, and they come back and just say, I'm not doing it to check up on you. It's totally up to you whether you do this. But would it help you make the appointment if we followed up on it? That's not a bad practice. So what referral resources do you have on your campus? Which ones have you used? Put some of those in the chat.
That may help other people that are on this think of things that they may not have thought of as referral sources.
As you're typing, we have two massage chairs that sit outside of our office. And we've always talked about like there's certain populations that have mistrust for counseling, or they've never done it before, or they're just not ready for that. But as I go talk to classrooms, a lot of times I'll say, hey, come by and use those massage chairs. It gets them a little bit connected, at least to our office. It gets it might start the process. It also might offer them a time to do some self-care that doesn't have to be counseling. So I use those. That's why they're there for us. And some campuses have them, within the counseling office. It gets them in the door and a little bit more comfortable.
I'm seeing some things in the chat: Counseling Center, Office of Multicultural Affairs, Academic Success Center, Disability Support Services, ePantry, Reentry, Veteran Services we have as well. Some really good comments.
I think there are a lot of resources that are available both on our campuses and in our communities, but oftentimes students who are stuck or struggling don't think of those things. So we can be a source of helping them think about things that, oh yeah, if I go to the gym, I feel better. So it may prompt them to go back to taking a walk or going to the gym.
I think asking them too, like, where are you connected on campus? And when's the last time you connected there? I remember walking over to our student center one time, and this is why I love the student population, is that there was a group of students sitting around a table and they were playing Magic the game, and they were being loud and they were having a blast. It was something they did like, over the noon hour, just right over there. It was like, that's where they're connected. They're connected with those folks. And you would never know that if you didn't ask, where are you connected? Who are you connected with? To be able to talk about, getting them connected there again. And is there anybody that, you could reach out individually to if you needed? But we don't find that stuff out unless we ask the questions.
And I think our consistent message has been that getting that support is normal. It's okay. And letting our students verbalizing that it's normal. I talked to a lot of students that are struggling with this. The next step in this whole process is to reflect. So after you've had an interaction with a student in distress, it's important to do a couple of things. I think document key points. I made a referral. Student is not sharing personal details, but at least document the key points of that. Respect the student's privacy. Take some time for yourself. I love the fact, Nate, that you guys have those massage chairs. I think if I was seeing students, I'd probably be out there using it once in a while just for that moment to take care of myself and relax. Assess your own well-being, because I think our jobs as advisors, as student-facing staff are stressful, and we have to take care of ourselves and engage in those wellness activities. That's one of the beauties of like the Fort Omaha campus here in Omaha is you can walk on that campus. So after you've had a stressful interaction, there's an opportunity to take a walk and get outside and de-stress so that you're better equipped to deal with the next student. I also think it's important that you consult as needed or per your policy at your college. One of the beauties of our partnership with UNO for my advocacy counselors is that we can call up Nate's department and we can consult if we have a student that we're struggling with. What would you do? Or I just had this interaction. Can you give us some help? I think that talking to each other or talking to your supervisor or to someone in your counseling department or your wellness center can help you make sure that you don't go home and have those sleepless nights about, I wish I'd done something else. This isn't a trauma workshop for you, but that self-reflection, you are all have secondary exposure to trauma when you're listening to students who are in distress. And you can experience a wide range of emotions. So it's important to take care of your own well-being. And we just talked about some of those things: debrief, reflect, look for ways to practice self-care.
One thing I would throw in there is that I think sometimes we'll take that home with us because it is traumatic. Remember, you're hearing it for the first time from them. And so we want to help them. We want to fix it for them. And reality is that it may not be a quick fix situation. The other thing is that they may have some coping skills with all of that you don't have. They've also been exposed to it for probably a longer period of time than you just hearing it. So, you know, they might have been in this space for a month, having this gone through, you know, this traumatic situation, and they've had time to process it. They've had time to work on it. For you, it's immediate, and we feel it as immediate. So kind of remind yourself of that too. And prior to those situations happening, identify the people that are your support, that you work with, or even outside of work, that you can put that self-care plan in place, because these things do happen.
We've kind of reached our point where we should be answering some questions. Nicole was kind enough to remind us of that in the chat. Nicole, do you want to throw out some of those questions, and Nate and I'll try to respond?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions for them, go ahead and type them in the chat. We just had some great comments about behavioral team at UNO, more massage chairs. How do we get those at Metro?
Maybe we should talk to our student services directors.
Sounds good. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now.
And I'm going to move on just a little bit, just to throw this out here. This is a situation of a student that may be typical. You may have seen this student. So you're working with this student. He's a 24-year-old straight identified Chinese American, cisgender male, majoring in accounting at your college, and he emails you to request a meeting to discuss their concerns about his program of study and his classes. And you respond. And I think we've all done that a lot over the last 18 months in particular. We get this email and student has questions and you respond back. And it may be that you're going to schedule an in-person meeting or a Zoom to discuss this question. And then what happens? Can you think about all of the things that could happen with this student? His response: what's wrong with MCC and its employees? I'm working full-time and babysitting, and I don't have time for this meeting. Just fix the problem or I'll complain to the school president and report it to the news. That way over the top reaction. So put in the chat just what your reaction would be, or how you think you would respond to that. Oops. Go back. Are we getting any chat things?
Oh, there we go. Tactfully, firmly, and professionally is a response.
Okay. If you had students that threatened to go over your head or complain, or I'm gonna contact my attorney. I hear that. You know, part of it is you're thinking about how you're going to respond to the student, but I think it's oftentimes it's important to take time to think about how you're responding to that and not take that response personally, but just think about what's going on with that student. Consider what are some of their circumstances, and be respectful, polite. Hey, what's going on? Let's get this. Are there other options? Think about what could be contributing. Student has a lot on his plate.
We have some other things coming up in the chat here, kind of feeling what they're going through. Try to explain in a caring way, in a clear way. I would tell them to understand I understand their frustration, but need to talk with them further to understand what's really going on, and how to address the issues. And then we have another question about the best way you found to support online students.
I respond, I think responding to emails in a timely manner. I also think comes a point where I will, as an online instructor, I teach adjunct. Sometimes it's just easier to say, let's have a phone conversation. Let's pick up the phone and let's just talk, because email, so many things can get lost. Nate, can you talk just a little bit about our experience with students and remote counseling sessions and the response to those students?
So we started this process where we didn't do any telehealth. And so we quickly had to change gears. And there's a lot of reluctance to that. And so that was part of our easing into the pandemic. And I think, we're going to hold on to that pretty tightly as we're coming out of the pandemic, because we have found that can be very effective. This student right here is the prime example. They couldn't come in person. So, what telehealth and what, Zoom and telephone calls does is that we have a lot of students that, they might not even be coming up to campus. They might be living, in our community, but doing online, or they might have three online classes and one in-person class. So coming in physically to the office might not be convenient. They may have to rush from class to work, but they can take a break at work to do some telehealth. We did some extra training, found out that, telehealth can be as effective as in-person counseling. There are going to be students that are very happy to come back in and do in-person counseling. And we're starting to ask those questions. What would your preference be? We're also seeing students at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And believe it or not, medical students are extremely busy. So for them, would they rather come in person? Sure. Do they have time? Sometimes not. So it offers a venue for people that may have never gotten treatment, a venue to do that. The other piece is, I think it also, even for advising or whatever else, as we think about this, is that, we get to that point in the quarter or the semester, and somebody comes in and they're coughing all over our office, right? It happens to all of us, and we're sitting there going, oh, I'm gonna get sick. Well, one of the things that we've thought about in our office is, it's very easy now for somebody to keep their appointment, and that they're sick, but not sick enough to not do the appointment, but they don't have to come in and get everybody in our office sick. So we can talk to students upon intake about, like, hey, if there's ever something going on, like, you got a really bad cold, but you want to keep your appointment, we can switch it to telehealth in that case. So I think what the pandemic has done is it's taken this case situation, and now we can expand it to thinking about, well, what is the real benefit of meeting with somebody in person anyway? We have to rethink everything we've done. Can we meet with them over Zoom or over telephone, and take their anxiety down? They obviously have a lot going on. So a response to that, if we change our policies that we were maybe a little bit more strict on before, to say, sounds like you got a lot going on. It's really, really hard to get up here. And like Julie said, is there another option that we could do to make sure that we're not missing anything through email, but we're able to have maybe a back and forth conversation. So to make sure that you get your needs met. So to try to roll that into this scenario, that's what we have found. We will be doing telehealth even after the pandemic is over. It will be an option.
You know, and one of the things is that historically, this has been the sort of student that is automatic. Oh, I've got to refer them to somebody else, where I think we can slow it down a little bit and reach out, because I think it could be solved at a much closer level with just some listening and offering options. Because he probably doesn't need one more thing that we're going to ask him to do, or one more person. He needs somebody to understand he's experiencing some challenges and to listen.
Thanks, Julie. We have another comment in the chat. It's just about having a few students that live out of state and doing video appointments and how it's been working out well. So that's helpful as well.
Just from the counseling side of things, so for your counseling centers, I want to throw this little plug in there, which we run into an issue, and hopefully some of this was changing because of the pandemic requiring us to think about it differently. We can't, like in most states will not allow you, as me as a practitioner, I can't see somebody in, say, the state of Alabama. If someone's living there, my license works for the state of Nebraska. And so states consider the treatment to follow the state DHHS requirements for the state that the person receiving the care lives in. It's not necessarily the case for physicians, things like that, but for counseling, that's the way it is right now. Things are changing pretty rapidly with that. There's states that are kind of joining up to say, no, we're going to join this collaboration and we're going to allow that to happen. So I think things are going to be changing with that for state lines, but right now it is a challenge for when people are out of town. So if somebody is in Nebraska, out of town, out of the Omaha area, I could normally do that. And some states are still calling it a state of emergency, so they're allowing it. But when we get out of the state of emergency, it's going to maybe look different. But we'll see how that works. So I think it's just good for everyone on this training to kind of hear that there might be some limitations for your counseling centers when it comes to situations like that. So we're always scrambling to find solutions to that.
Hopefully we've given you some tools to recognize, respond, refer, reflect, and take a different approach to students that you may see that are in distress to best serve them. Again, we're not expecting you to counsel, but we certainly want you to be one part of their support team moving forward. Any final? I know we're getting close.
Any final questions for Julie and Nate? Hearing some praise for you both. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. It's very helpful. Thank you again.
Thank you all for joining us. We should do it more often.
Absolutely. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Bye.